There is no doubt that there is a place in society for providing fun and thrills that are exhilarating, and there is a perceived sense of danger.
Some people have a very strong need for excitement in their lives, to frighten themselves to death, in other words, in order to feel that they've achieved something.
A lot of people have described me over the years as a master of terror, because really, in a way, that is what we as a company are purveying. We're purveying real terror and excitement, and I think it's probably something I'm quite proud of, actually.
In ancient times, when we used to live in caves and we had to go out hunting and fishing and shooting just to survive, everyday life would provide life-threatening dangers, and those in themselves were thrilling enough. Today we live in a more civilized society where many of these basic needs are taken care of, but we still have a fundamental drive within us to find out if we can face up to certain dangers, if we can test ourselves, if we can become more competent in various ways in dealing with situations which cause us extreme forms of anxiety. The need for excitement is tied up with feeling anxious about things. The two are, at a biological level, the same kind of sensation. The fact that we experience them as being different emotions is to do with how we interpret the nature of our environment around us. The environmental cues provide us some indication as to whether, in fact, we're afraid or whether we're enjoying ourselves. You see the ride itself, you see the reactions of people who have been on the ride, and all of these things can lead to a degree of anticipation as to how much danger there is.
Okay, folks, right now we have released the bars. Can you lead to the right, please? Exit to the right.
Danger, whether real or apparent, triggers a whole series of emotional and physiological changes. Within seconds, your nervous system declares an emergency. Your heart rate increases, adrenaline is pumped around your body, and blood sugar is mobilized, giving you the energy needed to deal with the perceived threat. For nearly a century, roller coasters have been the traditional fairground means of frightening and thrilling their passengers. And nowhere is that tradition more apparent than in Blackpool.
Blackpool Pleasure Beach was a family firm that's been going on for about 100 years. Will be 100 years next year, in fact. So I grew up in the world of amusements and roller coasters and mad things like that. And you know, breakfast at home when I was a kid, that was the only thing we talked about, really. It'd be a bit like being brought up in maybe a circus family. The first ride that was built at Blackpool Pleasure Beach was a very old-fashioned roller coaster, the L.A. Thompson Scenic Railway. It's an American device, and it was the really the most popular ride of the early years of this century. It became so popular that we got a name for our roller coaster, and from then on we've just built more and more roller coasters. We now have as many roller coasters as any park in the world. We build new rides every year. We build a mega ride about every 4 years, and smaller rides every year. We've done this for many, many years, and the trouble is that our public now expect it of us, so we're really sort of caught with our own success.
And now, Blackpool's traditional roller coaster supremacy is being challenged by the engineers and designers of the new theme park rides.
The roof can now stay until you're ready to run the ride. That's right, yeah. Oh, that's good news. The role that I play in designing rides is to take a concept right the way through, from an initial idea through to opening and beyond. In the late 60s, long before anyone had ever even heard of a theme park over here in Britain, I went to America, travelled around, learned what roller coasters and log flumes and dark rides were, and decided that I was going to set myself up in Britain so that when the time was ripe, when the theme park industry was ready to blossom in Britain, I would have all the tools at my fingertips.
I can look at a ride and recognise who designed it just by the style and the type of ride. There are certain characteristics with every ride that will give me a clue as to who designed it. Nowadays, loops and corkscrews are pretty standard and everyone's done those. But when you hear things like heartline twist or the barrel roll or the bow tie element, these are new style elements designed to give an extra thrill that no one can really understand until they've been on it.
Trying to devise new ways of terrifying people isn't easy. But with a background in theatre and as a special effects technician on James Bond and Hammer horror films, John Wardley has been a thrill ride designer for the last 15 years. One of his first creations was The Vampire, the Chessington World of Adventures.
The concept of a swing coaster, a suspended coaster, where the thing is hanging from the track and freely swinging backwards and forwards, was something that had been done in America, and I thought that it could work quite satisfactorily in Britain. And then we thought, well, how do we theme it? So, well, birds. No, that didn't seem to be quite right. Flight, well, planes and things. No, perhaps that wasn't right. And then we thought, well, bats. Vampire bats, Transylvania, and the whole thing came together from there.
A roller coaster is the biggest pull in a park. It is the ride that gets most people to come to visit the place. So if one park hears of another park getting a ride, they'll not try and sabotage it, but they'll come out with a new ride themselves, and you have a bit of a coaster war on. Now, at the end of the day, that's good for enthusiasts, because the more coasters, the better. But for the parks, with average rides costing over £10 million now, it proves a very expensive war, and ones that not everyone can win.
If we didn't invest, it's a very competitive industry, the amusement park industry, and other parks in the UK and indeed in Europe would start building bigger rides than us. We're not going to allow that to happen.
So, as Blackpool's illuminations came down for winter in 1991, the Pleasure Beach began to devise its next piece of wicked twisted metal. A new offensive in the coaster war was about to begin.
About 4 years ago, I was travelling around the old parks of America, built in the 1900s and the 1920s, like Blackpool Pleasure Beach. We ended up at a park called Cedar Point in Ohio, and they had just built the first steel roller coaster, which was of a entirely new generation, a mega coaster. This was 200 feet high. And early one morning, before the ride was open to the public, I went on the ride, in the front seat actually, with members of their maintenance crews. And I went down that first step, and it was just a revelation. It was, in a way, sort of like a sort of vision on the road to Damascus, you might say. And I said, we've got to have a roller coaster like that at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. So I rang up the manufacturers, Aerodynamics of Salt Lake City, and said, right, we want a ride like that, but bigger for Blackpool. Allerton Lomax, who are well-known structural engineers in Manchester, they designed all the substructure for the ride, which in our particular instance was very complicated.
The first task that we assisted them with was to carry out a complete topographical survey of the site at Blackpool Pleasure Beach to ensure that we had the data available to fit the ride down amongst the 100 or so attractions that already exist there. It's an extremely crowded site. Site investigation work had to be carried out along the ride route because the foundations at Blackpool are very difficult. The site is on the edge of the sea. There's a layer of peat immediately below the sand layer, which is covering the site, and peat is a very, very poor foundation material. modelling the proposed route of the ride, both vertically and horizontally. It was done by aerodynamics into a computer system, and then carrying out trial analytical work for the dynamic performance of the ride to establish the speeds and the accelerations and to see if the route was satisfactory. Roller coasters work by one very simple principle, gravity. They're pulled up to the top of a hill by a chain and then released. From then on, they operate under their own weight, running down the track under gravity forces. There's no engines, and until the end of the ride, there's no brakes.
A perfect roller coaster really is like a novel. I think it has a good beginning, a good middle, and a good end. The Grand National, the most famous wooden roller coaster we have, is a cracking good ride. It begins really fast, it's got some interesting features in the middle, and comes back to the station almost as fast as it began. And it's exactly what we wanted for the biggest roller coaster in the world.
G-forces, gravity forces are the critical part of a roller coaster ride. People sitting in a seat like this are experiencing a 1G downward force, and that's just occurring all over the surface of the Earth. But when you're on a roller coaster ride, you can force the car, and therefore the people inside the car, to experience either higher or lower G-forces by making use of something called centrifugal motion, putting the car around a tight bend when it's going at high speed.
And bends don't get tighter than this, the School of Aviation Medicine's centrifuge at Farnborough. Here, pilots are subjected to extreme G-forces.
The G-force is the inertial reaction of your body to the acceleration. Under positive G, everything is getting heavier, and the most important effect is the blood pooling in the veins in your legs. So you're losing your blood volume down into the lower part of your body. And at the other end of your body, head and eye level, your arterial blood pressure supplying your brain and your eyes is reducing as the G increases. Negative G is simply the opposite of positive G. The best example I can think of is if on a roller coaster you were to go over a humpback bridge, this sort of up and over sensation rising in your stomach, that's negative G, so reduced weight sensation.
When you go weightless, however, the interior of the body is not terribly well designed to cope with negative G-forces, and in fact the organs inside the rib cage are all hung from the top, so that when you are being forced into negative G situations, then many of the body organs start moving up inside the rib cage, which makes you feel pretty uncomfortable. That's the reason why you can cope with 3 or 4 G vertically downwards, but only 0 or little bits of minus G in the other direction.
Some aircrew in the Air Force would be described as G monsters. There are a few people around who actually like pulling as much G as they can, as often as possible. It tends to be more the manoeuvres that they're using the G to perform than the actual G itself. A fast jet like the Hawk, in which we fly here, can pull up anything up to 9.5 G for the purposes of our experiments. On a roller coaster, it'd be unusual to exceed 3.5 or 4 G. But the main difference is the length of time. In a fighter aircraft, you can sustain high levels of G for 20, 30 seconds, even longer. On a roller coaster, it's unusual for the designers to allow the G-force to last longer than about 4 or 5 seconds. If it lasts for more than about 4 or 5 seconds, that's the length of time that your brain has a reserve supply of oxygen available to it for. So if you were to exceed 5 seconds worth, people would, if the G was high enough, would lose their vision and their consciousness.
In the coaster wars, rivalry between Blackpool and Alton Towers is like the space race. John Wardley is designing Alton Towers' new radical ride.
The way I set about designing a ride depends on the park. The first base that I work from is what will the local planners allow us to do, which means height. When you take people up high, it's dead easy to do a good first drop. That's the easy part. It's the part of a roller coaster that takes precious little designing. Certainly at Alton Towers, our local authority do not want us to produce great high structures that are a blot on the landscape. And unfortunately, the high point of the site was not sufficiently high from the existing lowest point of the site to give us enough energy. So I had to dig a hole, and it was a tremendous hole, and it amounted to a very, very large proportion of the total budget cost of the ride. One of the most important things in my job is to know just how far I take things. I am not a qualified engineer. I take a concept, and my technical knowledge allows me to assess whether an idea will be practical. But I then have to work with skilled mechanical, structural, electrical engineers to actually bring the ideas to fruition. There are very few specialists that are able to do the bigger, more adventurous types of ride. And one of them is a Swiss partnership, B&M. They build, if you like, the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis of the roller coaster world.
B means Bolliger, is my name, and M means Mabillard, Claude Mabillard, who is my partner, and who is a mechanical engineer. So Claude is more looking on the mechanical part of the coaches, on the lift, on the motors, on the brakes, and myself, I'm looking more on the structural part, layout, dynamic calculations, structural calculations.
Carré. Ouais. C'est des arrêts qui ne s'entendent pas, elles vont se confronter là.
Every manufacturer wants to bring something new on the market. And what we do in our company, we a kind of brainstorming. Everybody comes with an idea. I think there's nothing new about brainstorming. Everybody comes with their idea, and sometimes there's a good idea. Maybe it happens once per year when we're lucky. At the beginning, it was only hills, going down slopes, going up again. You know. We try to bring also to the market new elements, like the zero G roll, where the people are weightless. Like when you're in the space, you see the astronaut which move upside down. We do the same thing on Earth, putting the people on a weightless condition and then playing with their body, if I can say. We created this new concept, which is called the inverted coaster. I would say an inverted coaster is no longer a coaster, it's a new experience. What we call the inverted coaster is a coaster where the people are suspended to a track. It must be very similar to flying in the air in a very old plane, where when the first people started to fly with only the two wings and a small motor, I think it should have been something very similar.
Just recap then on the timings. The Grand National has changed times. It's now 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock. And for those of you who were here last year, remember we boarded haphazardly running across the tracks.
The 350 enthusiasts here in Blackpool have come together to sample the rides and discuss first drops and barrel rolls and the next generation of thrill rides.
Jump off. You need your badge for this as well, by the way. Jump off.
As part of the club, we produce a magazine, so we're always looking for what the latest coaster activity is in the country. And very, very fortunately for us here, every park has to submit its plans to the planning authorities. So we've got a member, Paul Burton, whose sole job, it appears, is just literally ring around the planning office. He's actually known at quite a few of the main park ones. And, you know, every week he'll call around the planning offices for the major parks. And it was, about 2.5 years ago now, the Alton Towers one lit up, literally, very brightly, saying something big's happening at Alton Towers. So he rings me up on his mobile phone from the planning office, and he says, "You're not going to believe this, they're doing something huge at Alton Towers." So I said, obviously, just tell me all about it. And what he ended up doing was describing the layout to me over the phone. So there I was, literally just drawing the track. As he described it, you go up this far, you turn 180 degrees, you do blah, and I just drew the ride. And described it back to him and said, that's about it. So at that point, I faxed it to John Wardley at Alton Towers, who actually designed the ride, and said, just put at the bottom, guess what?
John Wardley immediately swore Justin Garvanovic and his friends at the Coaster Club of Great Britain to secrecy. But meanwhile in Blackpool, elements of the new mega coaster were becoming highly visible. To build the biggest, fastest, tallest roller coaster in the world, you need a lot of metal. Over 2,000 tons of galvanized steel was needed to create a structure which would be over 70 meters high and nearly 2 kilometers long. This main support assembly was one of the heaviest structures ever to travel along British roads.
When I saw the ride being erected, it was just sheer excitement, really. You know, I suppose I'm a little boy at heart, and seeing a big set of Meccano actually coming together, I felt a real sense of pride.
Blackpool Pleasure Beach stands on an exposed site on the wind-swept coast of northwest England, beside the Irish Sea. 20% of the construction cost of the ride will be spent on corrosion protection against the effects of salt spray, wind, and sand. One of the most unusual design features of the ride is its induction-formed track. Instead of welding hundreds of small elements of the metal track together, complete sections have been bent into complex shapes to limit the problems of metal fatigue. Over 150 track sections were fitted together this way.
The steelwork is designed to look extremely slender, to add to the thrill of being carried up to the top of it, to make it a more exciting experience. If you're on the ride on a fairly windy day, you can feel the steelwork slightly moving. And because it doesn't particularly matter that it moves around during very high winds in the winter, it is indeed designed to move around, and it will move about more than ½ a meter from side to side during very extreme wind conditions.
Unlike Blackpool, at Alton Towers, theming is an integral part of their ride philosophy. By creating an imaginary world, they aim to add another thrilling dimension to the ride experience. polystyrene foam and gallons of red paint are being used to build up the body of a sinister alien monster, waiting to wreak its vengeance.
The name of the ride, that's incredibly important. It didn't just sort of land in our laps. There was an awful lot of thinking and going through thesauruses and dictionaries and encyclopedias. I can remember our marketing director here at Alton Towers said, well, I don't care what we call it, as long as it ends in "is." And I said, well, why should it end in "is"? And he said, well, that sort of sounds vaguely sinister or prehistoric.
And now, from the park that brought you, Katanga Canyon, the runaway mine train, and the haunted house, comes the ultimate thrill ride sensation. A sensation to take you to the edge of your seat and the limit of your senses. Nemesis.
Well, Nemesis is rather bad news as far as I could make out. Nemesis is sort of the Greek sort of symbol almost of disaster, I always thought.
A roller coaster is not something that you can sort of send around the track slowly. It's rather like an aircraft. Either it flies or it doesn't. And you feel a bit like a test pilot.
Well, this is it. 2 years planning, and we're about to take the inaugural run on Nemesis. I think I know what to expect, but no one can really tell what's going to happen. We're in the hands of Sir Isaac Newton here. We're going up the lift. Once we get to the top, it's downhill all the way. Lovely view. No brakes, nothing. Once we're over the crown of this lift, we've just got gravity on our side. It's an amazing sensation. There's nothing beneath your feet. You're just hanging in space. It's, haha, wow. Here we go. Right, we're picking up speed, and we're about to enter the first inversion, the first barrel roll coming up now. And we're over the top. Now we're picking up speed again, going faster and faster, down, and now we're in the 0G roll. Oh, that's amazing. Three seconds of zero gravity before coming down and into a vertical loop, up through the loop, through a tunnel. And now, we haven't got any pause here. In theory, this should be the most exciting bit of the ride, upside down into a tunnel, out of a tunnel, and wow, into the brakes. I invented this thing, and I'm supposed to be impervious to this kind of thing, but that was the most sensational thing I've ever done. Wow, way up to my expectations.
The Roller Coaster Club of Great Britain is a wonderful gang of people, really, and they come here as an organisation once a year. They're all, and I'm sure they don't mind me saying so, slightly nutty, but I think people who are sort of really interested in minority things, and roller coasters are, in a way, minority things, always become a little nutty. But they're great, great characters. They travel the world to go on the world's best roller coasters. They have strong views on what they like about roller coasters, and they certainly tell us.
The Pepsi Max Big One is a pretty good ride. You get strapped into your seat, and then few seconds later, you're chugging up this 235-foot-high chain lift, and all you can see is miles and miles around Lancashire countryside. And then all of a sudden, the chain noise, the clicking noise stops. You go from that 235-foot height to ground level in about 3 seconds. And then you're flying. There's a series of dips that you take all along the edge of the pleasure beach. And you're bouncing up and down, and then you come to a real high-speed turnaround where it does a complete U-turn, and it does that so fast, and you see everyone lean to one side as the car turns around because of the force on them. And then on the return run, it crosses underneath the structure of the bigger drops. So it looks like you're going to have your head chopped off on the structure, but of course you're not. And then, unfortunately, you come up to a set of brakes which slow you down, ready for the station and the end of the ride. But no problem, just get back on and have another go.
During the ride, you will reach speeds of up to 85 miles per hour and experience G-force pressure, 3.5 times the Earth's natural force. And to experience vertical reality on the Pepsi Big One.
Oh my God. You had the best one. Because you lost the implications.
We need to go to another park sometime this year. Now, the choices will be due to demand, either Drayton Manor Park, with the promise of backward riding again, on the stand-up, or Alton Towers, with dark ride on Nemesis. So what I'll do is you give me a cheer when I say the name of the park, and then I'll decide where we go, anyway. Drayton Manor Park. That's two people going there. And Alton Towers.
I love the shape of it. It looks really horrifying.
Really, really excited. Pure adrenaline rush. A bit nervous. Very nervous.
It is important that you know just how far to take the intimidation factor. Because if you make a ride look too intimidating, people won't ride it. The queue is a very useful way of weeding out the people that are going to eventually bottle out. The last thing that we want are people on the ride that just wish they were dead. It's a dreadful thing to be on a theme park ride and just hate every minute of it. And therefore, we can actually use the queue by building up the anticipation, allowing them to see parts of the ride that they hadn't perhaps realized were there. So that the most difficult part of riding a roller coaster is making the decision to go into the entrance and join the queue for the first time. We can't afford people to bottle out in the station. When you're trying to load the train, the last thing you want are people trying to decide whether they're going to ride or not. We haven't got time to sort it out at that point.
I got up there, looked at it and thought, no, not for me. No, I was with my girlfriend. She's going on it, idiot. But no, I couldn't. I really couldn't. Some roller coasters I don't mind, but this is not a roller coaster.
Oh no.
Like there, I had to hold on to the guy next to me who I've never met in my entire life, but I'm very friendly with now, obviously.
I'm having a lot of trouble walking at the moment, so it's pretty damn good.
When you first go in there and sit down, it's sort of like you can listen to the ride going on behind you, so it's like sitting outside the dentist listening to the drill, if you know what I mean. It's all about torture, it's all about a build-up.
When we went round that first corner, I just screamed for the next 45 seconds.
The big one better. I give that 7 out of 10. I give the big one 10.
Better than sex. Just the most unbelievable thing you've ever experienced in your life.
When you come off the ride again, we want you to feel good. We want you to feel as if you've achieved something. We want you to feel as if it was not an unpleasant experience, but at the same time it was an intense, exhilarating experience.
I feel very buzzy, but sort of most of all, I feel really glad that I did it, because you see it and you think, that's very, very scary. I could never do that. I couldn't do that at all. And then you do it, and when you get off it, you think, yeah, I did it, and it was okay. And there's something inside you, you feel sort of quite proud of yourself. You think, yeah, I made myself do that, and I sort of, you know, I'm glad I did.
In research that psychologists have done into people's thrill-seeking behaviour, they found that there are people who they would classify as high sensation seekers and people who they would say were low sensation seekers. And these are people who would not only score differently on certain clinically developed psychological tests, but who also differ from one another in terms of their biological makeup, in terms of their nervous systems characteristics and their ability to tolerate extreme forms of stimulation. For the thrill seekers, it's almost like a drug.
I can still feel the adrenaline. It's actually tingling my fingers. It was superb. It didn't go upside down enough for me, though. A few more would have done me nice.
And after a while, the ride will lose its novelty, lose its thrill-seeking effect, and they will want perhaps a more extreme form of ride and a new form of excitement to experience.
For years, the 60-metre drop had been the roller coaster enthusiast's magic figure. But now that Blackpool has broken that barrier, the terror technicians are already dreaming of new ways to frighten their customers.
We don't want our competitors to know what we're going to build. Most people know that the next major ride at Blackpool Pleasure Beach is going to be the biggest dark ride in the world. Dark ride being the generic term for an indoor ride in the dark. But they don't know what it is, and we're not going to tell them. Let's have a look at the old plans.
This is actually the first of the drafts of the layout of the building.
Well, as long as it means the drop's steep enough to give them absolute hell, they'd be all right, wouldn't it? And it will definitely fit the site, will it, Keith?
It will fit the site, and it's taking over the whole of the swamp buggy and the whole of the...
You promise that? You're not going to get it wrong on me, are you?
100% correct, yes.
Oh, so this time it will definitely fit?
It will fit. There is no problem with that.
They need more extreme forms of thrill and excitement all the time. But the real physical dangers may reach a point in order to provide the thrill to the most extreme thrill seekers that are ethically, if you like, beyond what would be allowable.
In the future, designers of roller coasters couldn't really increase the G-force much more than they have already, unless they introduced measures to protect the passengers, perhaps by reclining the seats, or perhaps even going to the extreme measures of giving them anti-G suits. I don't think that would wear with the public.
See the one around the back here?
Not to be outdone by Blackpool, the management team at Alton Towers are already holding secret meetings to plan the successor to Nemesis.
Yeah. We ought to just ask them what actually does happen in this.
It's a black tunnel.
Black tunnel. That's the black bit.
The pressure from the thrill seekers, as well as from the competition, remains intense.
The chasing effect.
Approaching the limits of safety, human endurance, and shackled by their height restriction on the site, the possibility of Alton Towers building a virtual reality roller coaster ride, a simulated ride, must be high on their list of options available to them for their next secret weapon in the coaster wars.
The light barrier, wasn't it?
Yes. I mean, this whole new development is basically a refurbishment and relaunch of Fantasy World, which at the moment I think is a little pinprick in our balloon of magic. But I think it's more than just a secret weapon, or it's more than just a black hole. It's going to be about total entertainment in that area.
New theme, new style.
Up to now in the theme park business, everyone has said, oh, well, of course, in America they've got this, and in America they've got that. Well, the fact is that Secret Weapon for the first time is a ride that has never been done before.
It's unique to us.
And it's unique to us, yes.
There's a lot of talk that virtual reality rides will replace roller coasters, but never in a million years. I've ridden every type of virtual reality roller coaster ride because being in my position in the club, I get invited to do these things. You cannot replace the feelings that you get being 200 feet in the air, doing 80 miles an hour with the wind in your face, no matter what they try and throw at you.
I guess that people are going to, in fact, rebel away from this sanitised armchair kind of entertainment and will hanker more for genuine heights, genuine drops, the wind in your face and this sort of thing. which I don't believe virtual reality will ever be able to give. But maybe in 20 years' time I'll be eating my words.
I-5 next goes scuba diving in the beautiful, if dangerous, waters off the Bahamas.